Kim Starr. I oversee our Healthy Food, Healthy Lives priority area, and I want to first welcome our panelists today. From the Holmes-Isaacs Coalition, community organizer and tenant advocate Keesha Taylor, and tenant advocate Latisha McNeill, and from the legal advocacy group TakeRoot Justice, senior staff attorney Paula Segal. So since last March, we have all been asked to hunker down, and while better off families could escape to country homes or upgrade their existing homes, many low-income New Yorkers, more specifically residents of NYCHA facilities and housing, have been forced to isolate in homes that increase their exposure to mold, increase their exposure to asthma. They may be left without heat or gas, obviously making a bad situation even worse. So today the panelists are going to discuss their journey to organize fellow tenants to advocate for the safe housing that we all have a right to. And then we are going to have some time for Q&A at the end. A couple of housekeeping items first. This webinar is being recorded and a recap will be sent out after the event. Also, video and audio are disabled for attendees. So any questions that you have later on in our discussion, I invite you to put into the chat box, and we will cover the questions that way. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to first Keesha and Latisha, who are going to talk about the formation of the coalition, why they decided to organize, and why they took the bold step to sue NYCHA. And then we're going to hear from Paula about Housing Court and how TakeRoot Justice is helping NYCHA residents to hold NYCHA accountable in their partnership with the tenant coalitions. Okay, so with that, Keesha and Latisha.
Thank you so much. I want to first thank you for allowing us to participate in this forum so that we can really inform people about the perils that people who live in public housing have to go through. So basically what happened was that NYCHA, which is a public housing development, decided that they were going to do this thing called infill and take over our playground. This is a place that infill is something that NYCHA deemed was unused land. And it could be your parking lot, it could be a playground, it could be any open space. And for us, it was our playground. And for me personally, this playground was where my son learned to walk. So they decided that this playground was going to be taken over and built on. And they were going to put a 50-story building there. And we decided that this was not going to happen. A lot of us went to every meeting that NYCHA held, and we listened to their information, which was a lot of back talk, a lot of wrong information that every time we went, it just changed. And we were like, this doesn't make sense. And because of that, we decided that we needed to fight back, because NYCHA is, I like to call it the mafia. It is so hard to fight against them. And unless you have to have a strong will, you have to be determined, and you have to keep going in order to be persistent and get anywhere. So we decided that it was 3 people who just kept coming to consistently. A lot of people kept going, but we kept seeing the same faces. It was myself, Sandrea Coleman, and Jose Guevara. And we kept seeing each other at all of these meetings. And we kept fighting against NYCHA and kept fighting against a developer called Fetna. And this is the developer that won the deal in the end. And we decided that we need to do something. So we decided that we were going to create the Holmes-Isaacs Coalition. And Holmes-Isaacs is the 2 developments here that are fighting against this partnership that was going to try and build on our land. And they were going to build this 50-story building. And it was going to take our land, our air, the land, and just overshadow where we live. And they were selling us this pipe dream of they were gonna come in, they were gonna fix the lobby, but we had already just had the lobby fixed. They were gonna give us new elevators, but NYCHA had already promised us new elevators. Some people were going to get cabinets, but you're supposed to give us this. These are some things that are already promised to us by NYCHA. They were telling us they were going to give us repairs, but our repairs are already promised to us in our lease. So again, you are selling us a pipe dream that is promised to us in our lease. So we decided that as a coalition, we can come together as NYCHA residents and fight and tell NYCHA residents, you have the power to fight back. So this started us in saying that we have to empower other residents and let them know their rights, because that is something that NYCHA does not inform their residents. You have a right, you have the same right as other residents throughout the city. Just because you live in public housing does not mean you're entitled to repairs. It doesn't mean that you do not have the right to sue when your repairs are not done. So these are things that we found out about. These are things that we wanted to inform other residents. So we decided that we were going to start an HP action lawsuit in order to sue NYCHA, because we decided that this is not right. They were not treating us fairly, and we decided that we were going to fight back. So we decided we started the coalition. We started fighting back. We started with the HP lawsuit, and in that it grew. You know, we started to get members. We started to have regular meetings, and we fought back against this infield action that NYCHA started against us. And we started rallies. We rallied around New York City. We rallied at the mayor's mansion. We rallied at City Hall, and it just grew from there. And we were able to have public officials join us, and we actually won against this lawsuit. And to this day, right now, we won against Fettner, and he no longer is trying to build on our playground. And it was amazing. It was hard, but you know, just little old us who just decided that we were not going to have our land taken. We were not going to live in the shadow of someone who was richer than what we were able to rally against this. And it is still a fight living in public housing. It's a fight every day. It's a fight to breathe. It's a fight to exist, but it's a fight that we are willing to take. That was a lot, but yes.
Thank you, Lakeisha. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for attending this webinar. I just want to piggyback off a little bit of what my fellow tenant Lakeisha has stated. I also have been attending the meetings and noticed that Lakeisha, Sandrea, and Jose, you know, wanted to get the word out to other tenants and just have them understand their rights and also understand what this NYCHA 2.0 meant. One thing I noticed about NYCHA as I attended these meetings is that they use vocabulary words that not other tenants of other languages or other ethnic, you know, of other backgrounds could really understand and, you know, really comprehend what was being presented to them. So one of the things that the coalition and the members wanted to do was to get the word out to other tenants so that they would understand and comprehend the severity of what was going on and how it could affect our future and affect public housing. So one of the things we decided to do was outreach and really get the information out to tenants through door knocking and having tenants understand their rights. One of the things that we understood and heard from a lot of tenants was fear. So the thing that we had to really instill into tenants is that this is your right to fight for what belongs, for what you deserve. You don't have to fear losing your vouchers, losing whatever subsidies or any assistance that you're getting, because that has nothing to do with fighting for what you're supposed to be getting. There were tenants who had leaks in their homes for years, had tickets in for years, and just living in infestation, fear of the elevators because they weren't up to par, and you know, just fearing the safety of the building. There were elderly that didn't want to come out at a certain time because of, you know, the doors weren't secure like they were supposed to be, but yet and still fentanyl was presenting a whole new development without taking care of the development or the tenants that were already here. So one of the things that we did was we got a lot of tenants together, and we just went and rallied around what was going on, so that fentanyl wouldn't feel like they had the upper hand, because their plan was to slip in here like a thief in the night. And fortunately for us, unfortunate for us, NYCHA has the indication and the stigma behind public housing that we always want to hand up and never, always want to hand up and never want to help ourselves. When a lot of the tenants in NYCHA are very educated, who work 2 jobs just to sustain the sometimes the rent that is ridiculous, and we're not getting for what we're paying for. So one of the things that we did, that we were really gung-ho and bent on, was getting all tenants involved and doing info sessions, and just, sorry, that's my son, just getting as much information out to the tenants as possible so that they can get involved. Because the more you organize, the more you start to draw attention to the problem. And that was the whole goal of the coalition, and starting and just organizing with other coalitions from other developments, so that we can become a one entity, and so everyone can understand, so the government can understand, so the city can understand, mainly de Blasio, that we're not going to just take whatever you hand to us and just say we'll just take something rather than nothing, when that's not what we deserve. If we're paying our rent, we deserve what we deserve what we're getting. We all have children who we want to grow up healthy and happy, and a lot of our children are being exposed to pets, to varmint and lead, and it's just, we just had to let the tenants know, like, we all need to organize, get out here, don't feel like, oh, our resources are limited, because as we organize, the resources are start coming in, and that's what's going to help get us forward. And this HP action was a great a great vision for people to look forward to and understand, like, if they can do it, this is possible. And we just need to, as a community, get together and just protect public housing, because a lot of people, people talk about the homeless rate now. I've worked with the homeless, so I understand the severity of it. But if something happens to public housing, it's gonna only get worse. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lakeisha and Latisha. So my name is Paula Segal. I am a senior staff attorney at TakeRoot Justice. We are a not-for-profit legal services provider in New York City that focuses on providing legal support to groups that are organizing for fundamental change in the city, and supporting organizations like the Holmes-Isaacs Coalition, supporting tenant leadership, supporting low-income people taking power over the conditions of their lives. We were invited to come and evaluate how we could support the residents a couple of years into the campaign that Lakeisha described. By the time we were invited into this campaign, the developer that Lakeisha was describing, who was planning to put a luxury building on the playground where Lakeisha's son learned to walk, was presenting to the local community board, and the meeting I attended, hundreds of residents were there. It was extremely clear that the residents had done the groundwork to make sure that this was not happening quietly. This was not happening, without a lot of eyes and a lot of questions, and actually a lot of questions that the developer couldn't answer. And asking those questions, making sure that those questions were brought up with the community board, with the council member, by the council member, with the federal agency that regulates public housing, which is the Department of Housing and Urban Development in Washington, D.C., with the borough president, who filed her own lawsuit challenging the buildings, which lost, but it created a friction point at where there was just a lot of eyes on this plan to put a luxury building with a private library at the top that would not be accessible to residents of the campus. And eventually the developer withdrew. The developer withdrew his application, but the conditions that Latisha was describing persisted in the buildings. And there were a lot of things that seemed like in the years while the developer was building his case for why he would be the best thing since sliced bread for the folks who live at Holmes-Isaacs, kind of fell by the wayside. NYCHA let what were pretty new elevators get completely neglected. Boilers went out, heat and hot water issues persisted through the winter. As Latisha described, there was infestations throughout the buildings, and through the organizing that the residents did, they decided that they wanted to make sure that these issues that were impacting all of them didn't persist past this campaign. Just winning to stop the luxury building wasn't enough. So they started talking to us about what their options were and how to try to force NYCHA to correct these conditions. As Keesha said, NYCHA is a landlord. They are subject to the same law and the same regulations as any other landlord. They can be sued in housing court, which is a court that was established specifically in 1972 so that tenants could take their landlords to court when the conditions that they live in were not up to code. And NYCHA is subject to all of those same rules. But unlike private landlords, NYCHA isn't regulated by city agencies in the regular course of business. The city allows NYCHA to self-regulate when there isn't a lawsuit happening. Landlords get the Department of Buildings, they get Housing Preservation and Development, but if you are a NYCHA tenant, you just get NYCHA on the other end of your complaints. So in December of 2019, as a result of the door knocking that Latisha described, we got about 30 tenants across these 5 buildings to sign on to 2 different petitions that we filed on their behalf, representing these groups of tenants, describing the conditions in the buildings, describing the elevators, describing broken doors in the lobby, describing the vermin, describing the heat and hot water outages, describing lighting issues in the public areas, dark spots where it doesn't feel safe to cross at night. And we very quickly got the court to order NYCHA to correct all these conditions. There was no dispute that they needed to be corrected, and NYCHA did not dispute that it was responsible for these conditions. There have been times in the past when city or public landlords have said like, oh, no, that law doesn't apply to us. And the courts are always very clear. No, landlords are all the same. They are all subject to the same law. It doesn't matter that you, the landlord, are the city or the public housing authority. You have to follow the law. We got an order from the court in February 2020. And in March 2020, as you know, we all retreated to our homes. And what had been an opportunity for tenants to continue their organizing by bringing residents to court to show their power together to the judge and to NYCHA, and actually to the specific NYCHA officials who'd been named in the case, sort of vanished into the ether of Microsoft Teams and Zoom and what was happening online. But the court took this case actually quite seriously, and throughout all of COVID, there was an emergency part that never closed that continued to do its work on the internet. And since the conditions that were alleged and not denied were quite serious, this case was tracked into the emergency part. So we transitioned from in-person appearances where the residents all wore matching purple bows and sat together and got to really feel their power together, right? That was fun. To appearances online as the courts learned how to do their jobs online. Even though we had gotten an order from the court prior to the pandemic, directing the agencies to correct all these conditions, directing NYCHA, to correct all these conditions, NYCHA dragged its feet. And we found ourselves going back to court every couple of weeks for kind of a status conference. And then by June of 2020, it was very clear that NYCHA wasn't taking this seriously at all. And so the residents decided to file a motion for contempt of court, asking the court to hold both NYCHA and the specific employees that were responsible for conditions at Holmes-Isaacs in contempt. There was a lawful judicial order. There was very clear mandate in the order. Obviously, NYCHA and its employees knew about it. They were in court when it was issued. And there was certainly prejudice to the rights of the residents who were the named parties in the litigation. We filed that motion in June 2020. For the lawyers who are here, it is fully briefed, and the court has not decided it. Instead, the judge has decided to engage in kind of a mini monitorship of the conditions at Holmes-Isaacs, where we continue to return to virtual court every 6 weeks or so. And what we've gotten is a lot of enforcement and a lot of inspections that would otherwise not happen on a NYCHA property. So we've gotten Department of Buildings to inspect elevators and boilers and issue violations because they were broken, and issue specific violations, some of which NYCHA has repaired, some of which they have not. We've gotten the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene to inspect the vermin conditions, and they have improved. They haven't gone away, but they have improved. It's extremely frustrating that we had to take NYCHA to court so that the court could invite the agencies that regulate other housing in New York City into our public housing buildings to find the violations that are obviously there. But that is the situation that we're in. And we are continuing to push for a contempt of court ruling, but also with every appearance, there's incremental improvements. We are hopeful that the repairs that NYCHA is doing piece by piece to the 10 elevators and the boilers that service these campuses will actually make a long-term difference. But what we're really seeing is that it's not a problem of money, really. It's a problem of poor record keeping, poor management practices, NYCHA just really not taking the business of being a landlord particularly seriously. These elevators were supposedly replaced in 2016, which was 5 years ago, and NYCHA has failed to maintain them because there's no cost to them to not do that. I'll stop there. I'm sure there'll be questions.
Excuse me. Thank you, Paula. Yes, I'm going to start inviting folks if they have questions to put them in the chat box. I have one question for you all first. So since the pandemic, the New York Times reported that NYCHA's backlog of orders has soared to almost 500,000 compared to the previous year, which was still a staggering 375-ish thousand outstanding orders for repairs. NYCHA said that it needs $40 billion for all of its repairs across all of its campuses. It's projecting a budget shortfall of 300 million, I think, for next year, 2022. And with this year's state budget, I think state legislators asked for about $750 million for NYCHA, and you only got 200 million allocated. So that said, and I know, Paula, you just said it's not a problem of money, but I would like to hear from Latisha and Keesha, if you were NYCHA, where would you start? Where do we need to start with these repairs? If you had this $200 million, at least from the state right now, where to begin?
Okay. Well, first of all, there needs to be a complete overhaul because like Paula had just basically stated, it's a total lack of training, care, and upkeep of what they already have. Like she already stated, our elevators were brand spanking new. This was the first time in my lifetime. I grew up in public housing. I was born. My mother birthed me in this apartment in which that we are in this webinar from. And this was the first time that we ever got brand new out of the box elevators, and NYCHA ruined them. Okay. My son basically runs to the window and says, "Mommy, the firemen are here. Oh no, maybe the elevators are out," for elevators that are 5 years old. So they ruin brand new elevators. It's a lack of care. It's a lack of upkeep. It's a lack of respect for the people that they are supposed to take care of. So we need people who are qualified to take care of what we have. We already know that the boilers are horrible. A boiler's lifespan is 40 years. The boilers in these buildings have been here since the buildings were built. So if a building is already 40, 50, 60 years old, that's how old these buildings are. The infrastructure of these buildings are falling apart. The patchwork doesn't work. So we need to start from the inside out. So we need to really, truly fix the problem. Stop with the patching, stop with tape. You cannot give stitches to a wound that needs surgery. We need to really train people. We need qualified people, not people who are just here to punch numbers. My home management team needs to go. I was just outside doing a cleanup and they called to complain, "Why are you cleaning?" We're here to help you because your staff is just sweeping the dirt around. You understand? I picked up a piece of wood that was outside that looked like it was there for weeks and weeks. So why am I picking up the piece of wood that's been there? So clearly your maintenance staff was just doing superficial jobs. You understand? So again, I love to say your dress is pretty, but when the wind blows, your panties are dirty. That is NYCHA. That's how I feel. Latisha, go ahead.
I honestly, I really feel like there needs to be a review and there needs to be some type of accountability held for where the funds are going. Because even if we get the $2 billion, honestly, as a tenant, I don't see where the $2 billion is going. Because the repairs are not being done the way that they're supposed to. They're saying that this is all we have. Okay, but I want to see $2 billion put into the developments like it's supposed to be. There needs to be accountability and someone held responsible for where the funds are going, because if there's no funds, I don't see no NYCHA employees quitting because they're not getting paid. Everybody's getting their salary. Everybody's going home to a comfortable, living environment, while NYCHA residents are suffering, while the funds that are supposed to be going to the residents to make sure that they're living the way that that's promised to them in the lease when they agree to exchange funds with housing is not being honored. And I really, that's my whole spiel behind. It needs to be some type of accountability and some type of record keeping by an honest, reputable source that's gonna say, "Oh no, you just got 100,000 to fix these bathrooms, but there's still holes and there's still leaks. So where is this money going?"
Thank you. Someone just posted a question. From what you've said, and I think from what everyone has seen maybe in the news, NYCHA has been ignoring a lot of residents' needs. this is not a new issue, but because there is many elections this year, there's mayoral election, borough president, city council, district attorney. Is there a way, and maybe this is, Paula can jump in too, please. How is this being made an election issue, and who's doing that? And how can this get amplified for all the candidates that are running?
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, because I know one of the things that, you know, the coalition and some of the tenants discovered about fentanyl when they was presenting this development, this building on our property, is that they had donated a substantial amount to fentanyl, to de Blasio's campaign. So that made us question what was his plan for this development from the beginning? Was it really to help the tenants, or was it because he had donated this money to this official and now he was getting something back in return? So I think as we choose wisely who we vote to represent us as tenants and of New York, what have you given? What has been given to you by whom and for what reason? I think that should be something that should be reviewed, like where your funds are coming from. Is it coming, like who's giving it to you? Why are they giving it? What are their plans? Have they put, you know, applications in motion for certain projects, such as an infill or something of that nature? Just something where you would be able to get something returned and cash in later.
Very good. We do tend, like, the coalition did have, we did have a forum for our people running in our council for city council. We held our own forum for the candidates running for city council here, and we asked them a lot of questions about NYCHA, how they felt, what did they feel about privatization, where did they stand? So these are definitely a lot of the questions that, you know, you should look for. Like Latisha said, what is their stance on RAD? What is their stance on infill? What is their stance on PAC? Where do they get their money from? These are the questions you need to look into, you know, the people you are thinking about voting for. You know, those are very key questions that you should look into. Try and go into a lot of these forums and type your question in. Where do they stand? Because again, if they're getting their money from real estate, odds are they're going to be for privatization or some form of it. A lot of these candidates believe that NYCHA needs to have some type of privatization. I personally, you know, I don't believe that. I am for the Green New Deal for public housing. That's where I stand. That's where I believe that we should be looking to the federal government to fund NYCHA. They have disinvested in public housing. And this is why NYCHA is in the state in which that it is in. The federal government failed public housing. It did not only fail public housing in New York, it failed public housing throughout the United States, but it specifically failed us. You understand? And it owes us a lot of money. And we need to fight for that. We need to tell our senators, you need to fight for federal dollars. And that's the only way that we are going to survive. We cannot count on private developers to come into public housing and take over, because then we're going to lose our rights. People are going to be homeless. And as we know, de Blasio has made the homeless crisis huge in New York. You walk down these streets and all you see are homeless people. I know I'm taking us off of what we're the topic of today, but that is the real reality of what is going on. If there was not a pandemic going on right now, the courts would be filled with people who are going to be evicted right now. But that's the reality of what is happening in this city. So we have to know where people stand. These are the questions you need to fight for. These are the questions you need to ask. Where do you stand? Where do you stand on police brutality? Where do you stand on the police helping mentally ill people? Because that's what's happening in the streets of New York. NYCHA is filled with mentally ill people because they take them out of the shelters and they put them in NYCHA developments. Because truth be told, there are a lot of single apartments available in NYCHA because a lot of people with families live here, but there are a lot of empty single apartments. Because again, there's a whole lot of people living in apartments. I'm sorry, because it's overfilled. And they don't even know how many people really live in NYCHA development because they don't count accurately. There's a lot going on because of the mismanagement of NYCHA's development. There's so much. And when you go into these forums about people with candidates, you need to ask these questions. Put them in the chat box. Really listen to what they say. Go to different forums and listen to what they say to different people, because they're a politician. They're going to tell different people what they want to hear, but you have to check them. You have to make sure you're checking each thing, and then you have to see if they're saying the same thing in the same places. All right, I'm sorry. I can go on.
No, don't apologize. Paula, I do want to check in with you on this question though.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I was going to talk about something Lakeisha started talking about. What was the question?
Just with all the elections coming up, how
Oh, right. Okay, great. I could connect the dots back to that. So Lakeisha mentioned RAD, which is the Federal Rental Assistance Demonstration Program. And I think what we're hearing, and the way RAD works, is it allows public housing authorities to transfer their properties to private landlords and management companies. NYCHA has been taking advantage of that federal permission and has transitioned quite a few campuses. Privatization of public housing was actually not born with RAD. RAD became the law in 2011 under President Obama. Federally, New York City started trying to get rid of its public housing campuses in 2008 under Bloomberg, who transitioned a portfolio of public housing buildings to the control of Citibank, which got to get Section 8 vouchers for them. And I think there's a lot of synergy there between the federal policy that emerged in the years after and the way that Bloomberg created an opportunity using campuses that were actually not federally monitored because they'd been entirely funded by the state. And so actually HUD didn't have oversight of the buildings that had been transitioned to Citibank ownership. NYCHA remained the manager of those buildings. There has been a lot of conversation that kind of goes like this: if NYCHA is so bad, why don't we replace them? Let's get some better people in there. And RAD is the way that the Public Housing Authority has, for the most part, decided to do that. The way that the the RAD program works is it incentivizes for-profit developers, because the way for them to make money is through tax credits. So it's not, let's get some better landlords in here, community-based organizations, co-ops or residents have a say, other kind of public entities that might be more accountable to the communities. It's actually the opposite, right? It's entities that are accountants. And what we've been hearing from folks we work with is they do not want NYCHA replaced with lords who are speculators. They want public housing improved and they want it to remain public. And I think that that's a question to really ask candidates for every office, how they, do they feel like NYCHA can be improved, or are they ready to throw it out and move on with the privatization of public housing?
Thank you. Another question, which I appreciate, let's frame some things more in the positive. But so Latisha and Keesha, you earlier in the conversation, you talked about a lot of door knocking, organizing, bringing together hundreds of tenants from the 5 buildings, which just makes it sound so easy and like it just happened. But can you talk about some of the strategies that worked in the organizing, sort of best practices you can offer to folks in the audience, and sort of some of the lessons that learned that that might help some others who are in this webinar right now.
Yeah, sure. Like I said, I think one of the biggest, concerns I heard from tenants as we were outreaching were fear of retaliation from NYCHA. So one of the things, like stated before, that we had to really, get information, understand for ourselves so we can, bring it back to our fellow tenants through the coalition was, getting the tenants to know and understand their rights and know that by law, NYCHA could not retaliate against them for fighting for what they deserve, because this is what, funding is for them to have, safe and livable conditions. And if you're not living in safe and livable conditions, then you have every right to take NYCHA to court for that, because no matter if you're paying out of pocket or if you're getting a subsidy, it's to help you live in a dignified way. And if that's not happening, then the person that's getting the funding for you needs to be held accountable in whatever way that is, whether it's, a rent strike, rallying, protesting, housing court, whatever it is, we had to let tenants know that it's their right to move forward if they're in right standing.
Yes, I totally agree. What I learned most is that once we started with the rallies, it became easier. We started holding our monthly meetings, and we tended to get the same people. We always got the same. It was always the same group. And it was, what are we going to talk about now? What article are we reading this time? But when we had our rallies, because, we felt stuck, you still always feel stuck because it's NYCHA. The elevators are broken. It's the weekend special. It's the holiday special. You don't have any hot water. You don't have any heat. You waking up, and it's the same old, same old. So it's time to have a big rally. We're going to rally at the mayor's house. We're going to rally at City Hall. Those are your big wins, because when you put out that we're going to rally, and, your meetings are your same 10 people. Your meetings are your same faces. But when you put out your flyer and you have your rally and you have 50 people or 75 people show up, those are your wins. When you have your rally or you have your march and you start out at your building and then you're marching and you start out with 15, but then as you march and your rally grows to 50, those are your wins. So you can always have your meeting and you still see the same 10 people. You may feel like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? But then when you have your rally and your allies show up, that's why you're doing it. This is always hard work. Organizing is hard work. To stay in this is hard work because you have to have your tickets. You have to do your emails. You have to let your lawyer know. You have to tell the manager. You have to tell your congressman. You have to hit the councilman. You have to, you send your letter to the Borough of Manhattan office. You have to call this person. It's tiring. You're on the webinar to try and let more people know, to get more allies, to make more connections, to get more organizations on your side, so that you can have more allies for that next rally. You're always networking to get more allies so that you can fight this mafioso, this mafia, this big conglomerate that's, holding you down. Because again, like Paula already said, NYCHA only answers to NYCHA. And in order to get them down, we have to be on Twitter. You have to be on Facebook. You have to try and embarrass them to the point where they say, oh my God, let me fix this building. We are in court. We tried to hold them in contempt. And we still do not have an elevator that works every single day. People still have mold. People still, don't have a cabinet. I can show you, like, the cabinet in my kitchen almost fell on my son's toe the other day, and they still did not fix it. You understand? People are still living in dangerous conditions that by law, NYCHA is supposed to fix and keep us in a healthy living condition, and they are violating it. But we are still fighting. We are still organizing. We are still here today.
Thank you. Paula, I want to ask you to maybe go higher level and talk about, for example, the cabinet that almost fell on Lakeisha's son. And when you go to court, what you need to take to the judge to say, aside from just hearsay, but here's some documentation, here's some evidence that these things are really happening. And how do you guys work with the tenant associations to do that?
That's a great question. So text messages are magic. And one thing we really try to make sure that we know what tickets folks are putting in. We know what conditions are really like. Residents are really good at sending us videos, sending us photos, putting in tickets. And then, as Lakeisha said, also sending them to us so that we know what is happening. When we get some small wins in court, like we recently got the judge to order NYCHA to provide installation for everybody that's got an uncovered piece of their radiator that goes up to 180 or 200 degrees to the touch, which is enough to hurt you. And it turns out there are dozens of units like this across the 5 campuses. So we kind of helped frame the questions, and then residents went door to door to find out who actually needed that. And then we were able to bring that back to NYCHA, and we'll see if they actually do that installation, but it's a lot of communication, and it'll be another conversation with the judge if they don't do it, because she definitely gave them a deadline and definitely ordered them to do it, and not just for one person whose story we told her at the last appearance, but for everybody who's in that same situation. And a lot of what we're doing is taking the couple of words that the judge might say at the hearing, and then taking it back with the residents and saying, okay, how do we turn this into action? How do we make sure the most people are actually benefiting from those couple of words that we got the judge to say, or those couple of words that we got her to put in writing, and translating that into something that hopefully NYCHA will follow through on. I have to say, we have had better responsiveness from the regulatory agencies. The city agencies really don't blow the court's deadlines. They show up, they're responsive, they come and inspect, they come and re-inspect. NYCHA seems to have some trouble with following through, and keeping NYCHA accountable is just a big ongoing conversation to see if they really did what they said they were going to do.
Thank you. I think if no one else, it seems like the chat is all a lot of affirmation, but not as many questions. So if that is the case, I think I'm gonna thank you all again for participating. Thank you, Lakeisha, Latisha, and Paula. I just want to also thank the audience for listening, for your thoughtful questions. Again, we're recording the event today, and we will send out a recap to all of you in the coming days. And with that, thank you all again, and enjoy the rest of this lovely day.